I'm Shanti, the artist behind Shanti Fine Arts. Today I'm going to finish the oil painting inspired by Goddess Lakshmi. If you have not caught the first part of this painting, which was underpainting in the first layer, I will have that linked in the video description below and also have it pop up in the video above in the iCards. I hope you check that out already, and then go on with the part 2 and we'll finish this today. Let's see how. I started the second layer of the painting with the background, and I kept the background very simple. All I was doing is adding the same color in the same areas, just adding some more colors, because the first layer of color was just to cover the surface of the canvas, just to take care of the underpainting, or rather the tonal layer. And in this layer I'm adding a little more darker colors, a little more thicker paint, so that some areas are more colorful than the others. And then where there are shadows, I am increasing the depth of the shadows, or rather increasing the concentration of paint in those areas, making those shadows darker. So typically what I'm doing here is making the darks darker and the lights lighter. And if you have followed any of my tutorial in any medium, you would know that I am a big believer in contrasts. So I always insist on making the darks darker, as much dark as possible, and to go with lights as much light as possible to create that contrast. Onto the lotus, I started adding a little bit of green and yellow and blue, like the different tonal values of the green inside the petals first for this second layer. This adds a lot of depth inside the petals and increases the three-dimensional look, the realistic look of the lotus. Once I put all that green in the inner areas, I am adding a lot of crimson or magenta on the sides or tips of the petals. And I'm also adding a little bit of purple here and there with the magenta to make a tonal variation and create the contrast. Now in between that magenta and the greens, I'm adding a lot of white and unbleached titanium white. What looks here as pure white is almost nowhere pure white. I am always adding a little bit of unbleached titanium white to make it look okay and not so much stark white. And then I'm coming back with a flatter brush and blending the colors from crimson down to the green and kind of creating an even tone, so that the magenta is not that sharp magenta and the white is not that sharp white. It completely becomes a pink and gives the look of a actual flower, or rather an actual flower. So onto the stalk, I first painted the stalk of the flower in dark green color, and it's almost like very dark bluish green made with sap green and blue. And then I'm coming back and adding some highlights using yellow and mixed with a little bit of unbleached titanium white. And that is all I'm doing with the stalks wherever I'm adding stalks of the flower. Not much more than that, because I want the main focus to remain the portrait and the face, and not the lotuses take away all the attention. But I did one other lotus in the same way, adding blues first and then crimson and magenta on the edges, and then putting in white in between, and then blending all the color to make it come together. There are a couple of more lotuses, but since they are done in the very same way, I did not record this process to avoid a little bit of repetition and keep the video more or less short, because I know that a lot of people do not like very long videos. Once I'm done with the lotuses, and then I'm going to start working on the halo area. And just like the background in this area as well, I'm not doing much, not adding any fine detail or anything. All I'm doing is adding another layer of the same color, or rather more or less the same color. I'm adding more of cadmium yellows, and in some areas I'm adding a little bit of touches of titanium white, and I'm not smoothing it down, I'm just keeping it rough to create that uneven look. Onto the hair, I created a mixture of color using gray, and I'm using Paints Gray here, and added a little bit of purple and a little bit of blue to it to kind of create an inky gray mixture, and then first painted in the shadow areas. Once the shadow areas were created, I added a touch of unbleached titanium white to that same inky gray mixture, and then painted in the little lighter areas in between the darker areas. Onto the left hand side of the head or hair, I'm doing the exact same thing. Once the hair is more or less placed, or rather the darks and lights are a little bit created, then I'm coming over to the face and adding a lot of grays in the shadow areas of the face. It's the same gray that I'm using for the hair, but I'm using it very sparingly because I don't want the face to look like smoke. But I do want a little bit gray to it, and the gray and the rosy pink coming together will make a very realistic skin tone. But first, let's put the grays in wherever there is shadows, and then we'll go back and add another layer of paint in different areas of the face and make it all come together. Just like I said, I'm adding the gray tone first, following the reference photos, and creating the shadow areas first. And there is very little amount of paint actually in my brush. All I'm doing is scrubbing that paint into the weave of the canvas and adding that color into it. I'm also adding a little bit of purple here and there where there are darker shadows, and then I'm going to come back with the flesh tint and put that color in the lighter areas. You can use a flesh tint paint manufactured by any of the paint manufacturers that paint you use, or you can make your own flesh tint by mixing proportions of red, yellow, white with a touch of blue. And there is no hard and fast rule on which red or which yellow or you have to use. Just any red or any yellow mixed with a touch of white and touch of blue will actually create several different skin tones. So once I added the flesh tones in the mid-tone areas, then I'm coming back with the unbleached titanium white and creating the highlights. These are not the very sharp highlights or like creates the dots and lines or very shiny areas. These are the general lit up parts of the face, and typically the top of the cheek or the top of the nose will be the lighted areas because they are closer to the light source than the indented areas like under your eyes or under your lips or under your nose. Those areas are kind of behind little receded areas rather. So receded areas would be dark and the protruded areas would be lighter, obviously. Now I'm adding some burnt sienna also in the shadow areas so that the shadows does not just look like a smoky gray. It kind of has a variation of brown and gray. And then I am continuously adjusting the color of the different areas of the face. I want the face to look rosy, but not like a lot rosy, just a little touch of light reddish colors in the bridge of the nose and the cheeks and the lips, and other than that, more or less all the areas are kind of blended in. Now I'm adding the very sharp highlights, and at this point it kind of looks like blobs of color here and there, but don't worry, oil paint does not dry very fast, so I'll get a lot of window of opportunity to blend that color and make it even. Onto the lips, I did the darker areas or shadows with a mix of purple and burnt sienna, and the lighter areas I used magenta and flesh tone and a little bit of white here and there for the very sharp highlights. And most of the time, again, I'm using unbleached titanium white and not titanium white, because otherwise it kind of becomes very sharp bright highlight. Unless you want that sharp pinpointed look, you want to avoid that brightness or of the titanium white. Onto the neck area, I establish the shadows with the purples and grays, just like I did in the face, and then I'm coming back with the mid-tone areas with the flesh tone, and then again the highlighted areas with unbleached titanium white, and then finally the very highlighted areas I'm even adding a little bit of white. But if the neck has very little protruded areas, or the chest has very little protruded areas, so there is very little scope of putting actually very bright highlights in that area. On to the clothing, I'm first establishing the shadow areas using a combination of burnt sienna and purple. The color of the clothing, I want it to be kind of like saffron color, because it has a lot of significance in Indian culture. Like yogis are associated with the saffron color, and my portrayal of this painting, Lakshmi, was also inspired by the figures of yogis and figures of meditation, so I wanted to pull in the saffron color onto the clothing. Next, I'll be working over the hand area, and just like the face, I'm working in the same way for the hand. I first put in the shadow areas with the purples and browns, then I am putting in the mid-tone areas with flesh tones, the highlighted areas with unbleached titanium white, and then bringing them all close together and making all the colors come together more, so that the different areas of the hand do not look like somebody else's hand, and the entire hand comes together and has the similar range of colors. It will take a while to get that cohesive look, and that is something about portrait. It takes a while to bring all the areas of the face or hand or whatever areas of the body you're painting to get together and look cohesive, look like belong to the same painting. Now onto the body, I thought a little tattoo, a lotus tattoo, will be very appropriate, so I added it. I don't know whether it actually worked or not. I would leave that to the viewers to decide, but for me, I think it worked. Adding a little bit of shadows around, and now coming back to work on the hair. Now I created a very dark mix of black, gray, and lots of blue, and putting in the very dark areas of the hair. And then with the detail brush, I'm creating a few loose strands of the hair, because hair almost never settles down perfectly, and I wanted to create a very natural look on the face and not like an artificial look. You can still see a lot of blobs of color in different areas of the face. Don't worry, I'll get to them and blend them all together before I end this painting, but right now I wanted to focus on the hair and create the hair look. I added a little bit of shadows of the eyelashes and a little bit of the eyelashes, but for the fine detail of the eyelashes, I will come back later and add it in once this layer of paint dries. So the next day, all I did was adding the eyelashes, which I did not record on the video. So that is all about this painting. I hope you enjoyed the painting and the process. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you.